The rain fell in relentless sheets as an old, ragged man stood across the street from the most successful restaurant in the city. His clothes were torn, his beard was unkempt, water dripped from his worn-out shoes. To everyone passing by, he looked like just another homeless stranger searching for shelter. What nobody knew was that he owned the restaurant. And within the next 2 hours, he would discover a truth that would change his life forever. Jonathan Reed had built his restaurant empire from nothing. 25 years earlier, he had arrived in the city with only $30 in his pocket and a dream larger than his circumstances. He worked double shifts washing dishes, slept in tiny rented rooms, and saved every possible cent. While others spent weekends relaxing, Jonathan spent his studying recipes, customer service, and business management. His hard work paid off. 1 restaurant became 3, 3 became 10. Eventually, his company owned dozens of successful locations across the country. Newspapers called him a visionary. Business magazines called him a genius. Employees called him the boss. But there was one thing nobody called him anymore. Friend. Years of chasing success had cost him dearly. His wife, Emily, had passed away after a long illness 5 years earlier. His only son, Michael, lived in another state and rarely called. The friends who once filled his life had gradually disappeared as business became his entire world. At 63 years old, Jonathan had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. Yet every evening, he returned to a silent mansion. The loneliness echoed through every room. One cold evening, after another dinner eaten alone, Jonathan stared out his window and asked himself a painful question. Do people respect me because of who I am, or because of what I own? The question haunted him. 3 weeks later, he decided to find the answer. Without informing anyone, Jonathan purchased old clothes from a thrift shop. He stopped shaving. He left behind his expensive watch, luxury car, and tailored suits. Then he chose the restaurant that had originally launched his empire. The restaurant that still carried his late wife's favorite menu items. The restaurant where his dream had first become reality. And there he stood now, drenched in rain, preparing to enter his own establishment disguised as a homeless man. As soon as Jonathan stepped inside, conversation slowed. Customers glanced at him with visible discomfort. The warm atmosphere suddenly felt colder. A young host looked him up and down before forcing a tight smile. Sir, can I help you? I'd like to have dinner, Jonathan replied softly. The host hesitated. We're very busy tonight. Jonathan looked around. Several tables sat empty. I can wait. The host exchanged looks with another employee. We have standards here. The words hit harder than Jonathan expected. Standards. As if dignity depended on appearance. Before Jonathan could respond, the restaurant manager approached. His name was Richard. Jonathan himself had hired Richard 8 years earlier. Richard frowned immediately. Sir, I think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Jonathan's heart sank. This is a restaurant, isn't it? Yes. And I have money to pay. Richard crossed his arms. Some customers might feel uncomfortable. Jonathan felt a deep ache spread through his chest. This wasn't just a rejection. It was his own company rejecting someone based entirely on appearance. The values he thought he had built seemed to have disappeared. As Richard prepared to escort him outside, a young voice interrupted. Wait. Everyone turned. A waitress in her early 20s stepped forward. Her name tag read, Sophie. Jonathan noticed she looked nervous. But she stood her ground. We have an empty table by the window, she said. Richard frowned. Sophie, he wants dinner. The manager lowered his voice. Look at him. Sophie looked directly at Jonathan. Then she smiled. I am. For a moment, the restaurant fell silent. Jonathan felt something unexpected. Respect. Not for his wealth. Not for his status. Simply because he was a human being. Richard sighed. Fine. 1 meal. Sophie guided Jonathan to a small table near the window. As he sat down, she handed him a menu. What would you recommend? He asked. Her eyes brightened. The chicken soup. It's my favorite. Jonathan smiled. Then that's what I'll have. Over the next hour, Sophie checked on him several times. Unlike the others, she treated him exactly like every other customer. She asked if the food was warm enough. She brought extra bread. She even shared a few stories about her day. For the first time in months, Jonathan genuinely enjoyed a conversation. Eventually, curiosity got the better of him. Why did you help me? Sophie looked surprised. Because you needed help. Most people here didn't think so. She glanced toward the busy dining room. My mother taught me something when I was little. What was that? She said every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Jonathan remained silent. My dad left when I was 8, Sophie continued. My mom worked 2 jobs. There were times we barely had enough food. She smiled sadly. We were one missed paycheck away from being homeless ourselves. Jonathan listened carefully. So when I see someone struggling, I remember those days. Her words carried no bitterness. Only compassion. Then Jonathan noticed something. Her uniform sleeve had been carefully stitched by hand. Her shoes were worn, and despite her cheerful attitude, exhaustion hid behind her eyes. You work hard. She laughed softly. 2 jobs. 2. She nodded. Restaurant during the day. Nursing classes at night. That sounds difficult. It is. Her smile faded slightly. Tuition keeps going up. Jonathan sensed there was more. What happens if you can't pay? She looked away. I might have to drop out. The words lingered heavily between them. Here was a young woman helping strangers while carrying enormous burdens herself. And yet she still chose kindness. Before leaving, Jonathan paid for his meal and quietly slipped a generous tip beneath the receipt. Sophie discovered it moments later. $500. Her eyes widened. She rushed outside, but Jonathan had already disappeared into the rainy night. The following morning, Jonathan called an emergency executive meeting. Senior managers from across the company gathered. Richard attended as well. Everyone assumed a major business issue had occurred. They were right. Jonathan entered wearing one of his usual expensive suits. The room instantly stood. Nobody recognized him as the homeless man from the previous night. Jonathan began calmly. Yesterday, I visited one of our restaurants. Executives nodded. Then Jonathan displayed security photos on a large screen. Gasps filled the room. The images showed him in disguise. The room became silent. Richard's face turned pale. Jonathan spoke slowly. I built this company on respect, dignity, and hospitality. He pointed to the screen. Yet many employees judged a customer before he even sat down. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Jonathan displayed another image. Sophie. This young woman was the only person who treated that customer with kindness. Several executives lowered their eyes. Jonathan continued. We often talk about customer service. He paused. But true character is revealed when kindness offers no reward. The room remained silent. Richard finally stood. I failed. Jonathan looked at him. Yes. Richard swallowed hard. I forgot why we're here. Jonathan nodded. Many people have. What happened next surprised everyone. Jonathan didn't fire Richard. Instead, he required every manager in the company to participate in empathy training and community outreach programs. He wanted transformation, not punishment. Then he made another announcement. The company would establish a scholarship fund for employees pursuing education. The first recipient would be Sophie. Tears filled Sophie's eyes when she was called into the meeting later that day. She had no idea what was happening. Jonathan personally informed her that her nursing education would be fully funded. Every semester, every textbook, every expense, paid in full. Sophie couldn't speak. She simply cried. And for the first time since Emily's death, Jonathan felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Over the following months, Jonathan became increasingly involved with his employees. He visited restaurants regularly, not as a CEO. As a listener, he learned about their struggles, their dreams, their families, their challenges. The walls he had built around himself slowly began to crumble. Meanwhile, Sophie flourished. Without the burden of crushing financial stress, she excelled in nursing school. 3 years later, she graduated with honors. Jonathan proudly attended the ceremony. As Sophie walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she spotted him in the crowd. The same man she had once offered a simple seat by the window. The same man who had changed her future. Their eyes met. Both smiled, because they understood something many people never learn. Kindness is never small. A seat at a table. A warm meal. A moment of dignity. A simple act of compassion. These things can change lives in ways we never imagine. Years later, when reporters asked Jonathan what the greatest investment of his career had been, they expected him to mention a restaurant, a business acquisition, or a successful expansion. Instead, he answered without hesitation. A waitress named Sophie. The reporter looked confused. Jonathan smiled. She reminded me that success isn't measured by how many people work for you. He paused. It's measured by how many people you lift up. The restaurant empire continued to grow. But that was no longer Jonathan's proudest achievement. His proudest achievement was rediscovering his humanity. And it all started because one young waitress looked beyond torn clothes and saw a person. A person who needed a seat. A person who needed kindness. A person who needed hope. The truth is, every day we encounter people carrying invisible burdens. Some wear expensive suits. Some wear worn-out jackets. Some appear successful. Others seem forgotten. But every person has a story. Every person deserves dignity. And every act of kindness creates a ripple effect far greater than we can see. Because sometimes, the smallest gesture becomes the moment that changes someone's life forever. And sometimes, saving a seat for a stranger ends up saving two souls at the same time.